Welcome to the video abstract for Intelligence and Creativity Mapping Constructs on the Space-Time Continuum. Intelligence and creativity are most important in terms of knowledge acquisition and production. It's critical to understand their relationship, but this is yet an open problem. All possible set relations have been proposed and justified, and we need clarification. Two ingredients are necessary. One, level equivalent definitions for intelligence and creativity, because implicit definitions are not sufficient, as understanding would change by changing measures. And two, consideration of the context embedding the episodes under study, because discriminating between intelligence and creativity depends critically on the context. Intelligence can be defined as a context-embedded phenomenon requiring goal-directed effectiveness. Creativity can be defined as a context-embedded phenomenon requiring potential, originality, and effectiveness. Potential is necessary to obtain a dynamic definition of creativity, including both creative achievement and creative inconclusiveness, a key in distinguishing intelligence and creativity. By comparing definitions, we find two explicit similarities, context embeddedness and effectiveness, and two explicit differences. Creativity does not necessarily require goal direction, and intelligence does not necessarily require originality. The two constructs are thus not identical, but they do overlap. To understand how, we must classify context. Tightness and looseness have been introduced in order to classify the culture of societies. A tight society is characterized by very stringent norms, with little tolerance for those who break the rules. In a loose society, norms are flexible and errors are tolerated. Here we apply tightness and looseness in a new way to conceptual space and available time. Conceptual space is the portion of knowledge that is exploited and explored in the episode under study. In a tight conceptual space, a single correct solution exists. There is little tolerance for ambiguity and mistakes. In a loose conceptual space, many alternatives are possible. There is high tolerance for ambiguity and errors. The available time t is the period over which a response is expected. When time is tight, there are stringent schedules with little tolerance for delay and a sense of urgency. When time is loose, there are ample periods of time for possible outcomes, and there is tolerance for delays. Considering space S and time t as axes of a bidimensional space, we obtain the space-time continuum that can be subdivided into four quadrants. Tight space, tight time, pure tightness. Loose space, tight time, hybrid. Tight space, loose time, also hybrid. And loose space, loose time, pure looseness. When space and time are tight, intelligence is dominant. Creativity might even interfere, leading to destruction or delay, which can be punished. In the two hybrid quadrants, intelligence and creativity largely overlap and interact. When space and time are loose, creativity is dominant. There may be long periods of creative inconclusiveness with associated suffering. Due to this, intelligence might induce a change of environment. To distinguish the two constructs, we should contrast the pure tight versus loose quadrants, whereas to find commonalities we should focus on the hybrid quadrants. The space-time continuum can also be interpreted as a measurement context. A TSTT measurement context is ideal for laboratory experiments and tests. Tight time is necessary for validity of a statistical analysis, and instructions make a conceptual space tight. This is very well suited for measuring intelligence, but much less so for creativity. Examples for intelligence include IQ testing, SAT, and so on, and most of the field of the neuroscience of intelligence. An example for creativity is the remote associates test. The LSTT quadrant is still suited for laboratory testing, exploring alternatives in a tight time. For intelligence, we can measure fluency and flexibility without an interest in originality, while for creativity, originality becomes crucial. Examples include the alternative uses test, the epoch battery, and so on. The field of the neuroscience of creativity can also be mapped here. In the TS-LT quadrant, space S is tight, which helps objectivity in scoring. However, time t is loose. Outcomes are not scheduled. It's thus very difficult to work in the lab, and research moves to the field. Methodologies include case studies, biographies, dynamic testing, and so on. Finally, measurement reaches its highest difficulty when both space and time are loose. The techniques mentioned for the TSLT quadrant apply, but must also account for dynamic effects, with judgment that can change over time and culture. Here there is room for innovation. Eminent personalities can be mapped onto the quadrants of the space-time continuum. For example, Pico della Mirandola and Marilyn vos Savant for the TSTT quadrant, for their excellence in terms of memory and IQ. Guglielmo Marconi and Steve Jobs for the LSTT Quadrant, for disrupting innovations in tight schedules against competition. Marie Curie and Henri Poincaré for the TS-LT Quadrant, for eminence in science. Finally, Leonardo da Vinci and Vincent van Gogh for the LS-LT Quadrant, for immense but underappreciated creative production in the course of their lives. Theories and hypotheses can be mapped on the ST continuum, and some examples are shown on the slide. Considering personality traits, conscientiousness should be crucial when space is tight, along with persistence when time is loose. In contrast, openness should be at a prime when space is loose, along with tolerance of ambiguity. Tightening time induces need for closure. Emotional intelligence can be studied as a function of pressure in quadrants. The context experienced in childhood has bearing on development. Context features may be internalized to become a thinking style. In education, the tightness, looseness of space and time have critical consequences on the growth of both intelligence and creativity in students. Finally, in professional environments, it is possible to adopt the ST continuum to model a company's climate and culture, with impact on recruiting, management, and intellectual property production. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and we invite you to dig deeper into the space-time continuum.